In past episodes, I've spoken about some pretty hardcore books. Books bound in metal, books with chains, books with curses to ward off would-be thieves. But what about books bound in poison? Hello and welcome to a new episode of Bite-Sized Book History. I'm your host, Allie Alvis, who you may know better as Book Historia. I'm a book historian and rare book cataloger at antiquarian book dealer Type Punch Matrix. I mentioned arsenical books in my episode about 19th century publisher's cloth bindings. But arsenical bookbinding goes back to at least the 16th century. This isn't a name of the rose situation, though. This arsenic was not applied for nefarious purposes. Nor was it some sort of early modern insecticide. Instead, the use of arsenic green in these 16th century bookbindings was a case of economy and aesthetics, as it was really in the 19th century, but I'll get back to that. I'll mostly be speaking from my experience with this copy of Ulysses Aldrovandis De Animalibus Insectis, published in 1602 and held by the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. When I was the reference librarian of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives Special Collections, this was one of my favorite books to bring out on reading room tours. It was the first book published solely on insects and features some really great woodcuts of varying accuracies. But my favorite part was the binding. It's a beautiful example of a 16th, 17th century German quote-unquote budget binding, using relatively cheap materials to make something that looks a little nicer. The spine and corners of the boards are covered in alum-tawed pigskin, a strong and flexible material. It was also a very plentiful material in Germany where this book was bound, owing to the signature German high pork consumption. Taking a peek at the edges of the boards reveals that they're actually quite thin. They're padded out with cheaper card to make them a bit thicker. An additional cost-cutting measure is revealed by damage. One of the pigskin corners has come off, revealing that the majority of this binding's covering is manuscript waste, reused vellum leaves from discarded manuscripts that have been disguised with green paint. This green paint is the source of the book's toxicity. It contains arsenic, specifically yellow orpiment or arsenic sulfide. This specific green is a pigment called vergaux, which has been in use since the 10th century. Cennino Cennini recorded a recipe for this green in his Libro dell'arte, written in the first half of the 15th century. Vergaux was used in all sorts of contexts, including medieval panel paintings, to brighten up shields and lances, and in illuminated manuscripts. The 8th century Irish Book of Kells features illuminations done in vergaux green. In the case of this copy of De Animalibus Insectis, the vergaux was used specifically to spruce up the manuscript waste. De Animalibus would have been quite an expensive work in its time, owing to its large size and the many woodcuts it contains. Books in this period were usually sold unbound, either in loose sheets or a temporary paper wrapper. It would be up to the buyer to take the book to be bound. So it makes sense that whoever purchased this very expensive volume would want to cut costs somewhere. They just didn't expect their thriftiness to come with a dangerous side effect. And to be fair, neither did the field of librarianship for several centuries. In 2018, the University of Southern Denmark began a project to use special imaging techniques to read the disguised manuscript waste on 3 different books that look remarkably similar to the Smithsonian copy of De Animalibus Insectis. The University of Southern Denmark wrote up a blog post on their findings, in which I recognized the binding style of the books being studied. As I mentioned, this type of binding was pretty common for books bound in Germany in the 16th and 17th centuries, so the resemblance is not surprising. Their discovery that the green paint was full of arsenic, however, was quite unexpected. After reading the University of Southern Denmark's blog post, I embalmed our copy of De Animalibus Insectis in bubble wrap and reached out to the Smithsonian Museum Conservation Institute to have it tested. They scanned the covers of the book using X-ray fluoroscopy, or XRF. This is a non-destructive process that bounces energy off of different atoms and measures the way they respond. The finding was clear. This green was made with arsenic, which led to my identification of the pigment as Virgo. Follow-up testing indicated that, while no one should ingest this amount of arsenic, it was no immediate danger to librarians or readers, provided they take the proper precautions. The book is now stored in a special box and is one of the few books in the collection that must be handled with nitrile gloves. And that's the end of poison in books, right? Obviously, once people figured out that arsenic was dangerous, they wouldn't keep using it, right? Well, no. Actually, in Cennino Cennini's original recipe for Virgo, he notes that yellow orpiment can be dangerous if swallowed. I expect the calculus of the person who painted the binding of De Animalibus Insectus green went something like, well, it's not like anybody's going to eat this book, and it's a nice shade of green, so what the heck? I'm certain that a similar reasoning was used in the 18th century when they began to use Scheele's green. Carl Wilhelm Scheele invented his green pigment in 1775, and it was quickly lauded and incorporated into various decorative arts. Part of the reason Scheele's green was so popular was its high quality and low cost. Scheele took advantage of the ever-increasing chemical knowledge at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. He combined sodium carbonate, arsenious oxide, arsenic, and copper sulfate to make his green. Scheele's green and the chemically similar Paris green were widely used in the 19th century to create fake flowers, verdant wallpaper, and even clothing. By the 1840s, arsenic green had once again made it onto bookbindings, this time as cloth dye. By this period, industrially made cloth had become a sturdy and cheap alternative for the traditional leather or vellum-covered book. Again, while arsenical green was a known quantity even at the time, check out these incredibly goth cartoons drawing attention to the issue, we didn't know it was used in bookbinding until recently. In 2019, while conserving a 19th century book, Melissa Tadone, a conservator at the Library of Delaware's Winterthur Museum, noticed the dye on the book's cloth was behaving differently from others she had worked with. She passed the book on to Rosie Grayburn at Winterthur's Scientific Research and Analysis Laboratory, who confirmed the arsenic content of the cloth. In response to this finding, Tadone founded the Poison Book Project at the Winterthur. Initially, this project tested cloth bindings at the Winterthur Museum and the Library Company of Philadelphia for arsenic. Out of 350 books tested, 37 were found to contain arsenic. The Poison Book Project has now expanded to work with libraries, universities, and institutions all over the world to create a database of arsenical and other poisonous book bindings and to advise on proper handling practices. The Poison Book Project guidelines for working with arsenical books are found on their website, but here's the distilled version. First of all, if you have a green book, don't panic. Odds are it doesn't contain arsenic. Most don't. If your book is a particularly vibrant shade of green, like the ones you can see on the Poison Book Project website, you might want to take precautions. One such precaution is handling the book with surgical or nitrile gloves, the rubber gloves you often see at the doctor's office. You should wash your hands after handling a potentially arsenical book, even if you did wear gloves. Of course, I trust all of you not to go around biting books. After all, I remind you after every episode, but it is particularly important not to ingest the arsenical book bindings. You should also wipe down your work area after you're done with the book to avoid possible contamination. And the book should be stored away from others, preferably in a zip-top bag. If you're not sure if your book is toxic, it doesn't hurt to wash your hands anyway. That does it for this episode of Bite-Sized Book History. I've written extensively on my work with arsenical books, so check out the description below for links to my pieces, as well as links to the Poison Book Project website. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see an episode on a particular topic. I'm always taking suggestions. And please check out my Patreon if you would like to support me and my videos. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time, and for real, don't bite your books.